What would you do if the love of your life betrayed you, and that betrayal led to a tragic death? It was a quiet, autumn evening in Willow Creek, Texas, a town where everyone knew each other's business, and secrets were hard to keep. But behind the walls of a seemingly peaceful home, a dark story was unfolding, one that would forever change the lives of the town's residents. The body of James Walker, a well-liked middle-aged teacher, was discovered in his modest house on the outskirts of Willow Creek. The small town, known for its tight-knit community, was shaken to its core by the news. James had been found lying on the floor of his living room, his face frozen in a grimace, signs of a violent struggle evident around the room. His sudden death left people wondering how a man so loved could meet such a tragic end. As news spread, the first suspect was his ex-wife, Emily Walker. The couple had been through a bitter divorce just months earlier. Emily, once his high school sweetheart, had moved on quickly after their separation, finding solace in the arms of a man named Ethan Stone. Ethan was a man with a shadowy past, a former convict with a violent history, but to Emily, he represented everything that was missing from her life with James. The excitement, the danger, the thrill of living on the edge. James, on the other hand, had struggled to accept their split. He had been devastated by Emily's betrayal. The love he had once known had turned to ashes, and yet, he still longed for her return. He couldn't understand how the woman he loved had moved on so easily. The pain of losing her and the realization that his marriage was over haunted him. Friends and colleagues noticed the change in him. His once bright demeanor had faded, replaced with a quiet sadness that no one could shake. As days passed, the tension between Emily, Ethan, and James grew. Emily tried to move on, but her relationship with Ethan was not as perfect as she had hoped. Ethan, despite his charming exterior, was filled with jealousy and insecurities. He despised the fact that James still held a place in Emily's heart, and he began to show more of his violent tendencies. Arguments between Emily and Ethan became frequent, with Ethan's temper growing more unpredictable by the day. One fateful morning, the peace of Willow Creek was shattered. Mrs. White, an elderly neighbor, grew concerned when she hadn't seen James for a few days. His mail had piled up outside his door, and something didn't feel right. When she entered his house, she was met with a gruesome sight, the lifeless body of James, sprawled across the floor in a pool of blood. Mrs. White immediately called the police, and the local force, led by Detective Claire Richardson, was dispatched to the scene. As Claire and her team scoured the crime scene, they found signs of a violent struggle, furniture overturned, broken glass, and a bloody baseball bat in the garage. James had fought back, but it seemed that in the end, he had been overpowered. The case quickly escalated from a potential robbery gone wrong to something far darker, an act of vengeance. It became clear that James's death was not just a random act of violence but the tragic end of a love triangle that had turned deadly. The investigation began with Emily and Ethan, who were brought in for questioning. Emily appeared distraught, her eyes red from crying, while Ethan remained stoic, his face unreadable. Detective Claire noted the stark contrast between the two. Her instincts told her there was more to their story than met the eye. Emily explained that she hadn't seen James for several days, and their last conversation had been about finalizing the sale of their former home. Ethan corroborated Emily's story, stating that they had spent the night of James's death at his apartment, miles away from the crime scene. Their alibis seemed solid, but Claire felt something was off. She ordered a thorough search of Ethan's apartment, hoping to find a clue that would lead her to the truth. What she uncovered sent a shock through the investigation. A forensic analysis revealed that James had put up a significant fight before he died. There were signs of blunt force trauma to his head, suggesting that he had been struck multiple times with a heavy object. The discovery of the bloodied baseball bat in Ethan's garage further complicated the case. The bat had James's fingerprints on it, but there were also smudges that suggested someone else had handled it. Claire ordered the bat to be sent to the lab for further analysis, hoping it would provide the crucial lead they needed. The quiet town of Willow Creek was now abuzz with rumors. Theories ranged from a robbery gone wrong to a crime of passion. James's friends and colleagues painted a picture of a man who was deeply troubled but not without enemies. His marriage to Emily had faltered due to their inability to have children, and his sense of loss was palpable. It seemed that everyone had a theory, but no one had the truth. Detective Claire knew that solving this case would require more than just piecing together evidence. It would mean unraveling the tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and revenge that lay at the heart of it. As the investigation into James Walker's death deepened, Detective Claire Richardson began to piece together the complexities of the relationships that had ultimately led to his tragic demise. It became clear that James and Emily's marriage had been on the rocks long before that fateful night. James had always been the stable, loving partner, the kind of man who believed in loyalty and commitment. He had been a high school teacher, a man who made a difference in his students' lives, but when it came to his personal life, things weren't as perfect. For years, James and Emily struggled with infertility. The dream of starting a family had become a weight they couldn't lift. The inability to have children wore on them, slowly eroding the love and connection that once seemed unbreakable. Emily, for all her charm and kindness, began to feel trapped. The life she shared with James had lost its spark. She longed for excitement, for something that would fill the void that had been growing between them for years. James tried to fix it. He bought her flowers, planned weekends away, but nothing seemed to rekindle the passion they once shared. Emily had begun to crave something more, something she couldn't find in their marriage. It wasn't long before she found it, in the form of Ethan Stone. Ethan was everything James wasn't. Where James was steady and reliable, Ethan was unpredictable and thrilling. He had a dangerous aura about him, and Emily was drawn to it. Ethan's past was dark. He had spent years in prison for assault and armed robbery, but Emily didn't care. His rugged good looks, his confidence, and the raw intensity of his personality made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. He gave her the attention and excitement she craved, and soon, she became entangled in an affair that would turn her life upside down. James, of course, had no idea about Ethan. He was consumed by the belief that Emily would return to him, that they could repair what was broken. But it was Emily's emotional distance and growing resentment that fueled her desire for change. She began to pull away from James, seeking solace in Ethan's arms. The affair was not just about passion, it was about escaping the confines of a life that had become suffocating. But even as Emily became more involved with Ethan, her guilt began to surface. She knew what she was doing to James, and though she tried to justify her actions, the weight of her betrayal pressed down on her every day. Yet, there was no turning back. She had already crossed a line, and the more she justified her choices, the deeper she sank into a life of lies. James, for his part, couldn't understand what had gone wrong. He tried everything to make their marriage work, but Emily had become a stranger to him. He noticed the way she looked at him less and less, the way she seemed distracted, distant. But he kept pushing forward, holding on to the hope that their love would pull them through. It wasn't until Emily came to him, announcing their divorce, that James realized the truth: Emily had moved on. The pain of rejection crushed him. He couldn't grasp how everything they had built could unravel so quickly. But what Emily didn't know, what James couldn't have foreseen, was that his desperation to win her back would become his downfall. As Emily and Ethan's relationship grew, so did Ethan's obsession with Emily. His possessiveness began to surface in ways that terrified her. Ethan wasn't content with just being with Emily, he wanted to control her. The more he sensed James's lingering presence in Emily's life, the more his jealousy turned into rage. Ethan had been in and out of prison, but his violent tendencies were still very much alive, and his jealousy of James only served to bring those tendencies to the surface. The love triangle between the three of them, James, Emily, and Ethan, wasn't just about affection. It had become about power, control, and revenge. Ethan resented James for continuing to occupy a place in Emily's heart, even though their marriage was over. The arguments between Ethan and Emily became more frequent, their conversations filled with veiled threats. Ethan began to feel that the only way to truly have Emily, to sever the last connection she had to James, was to eliminate the man standing in his way. At this point, the tension between the three of them had reached a boiling point. The lines between love and hate had blurred, and everything had become a game of survival. Ethan was no longer just Emily's lover, he was a man on a mission, driven by jealousy, possessiveness, and a deep desire for control. Emily, while still caught in the web of her emotions, began to understand the full extent of what Ethan was capable of. But she didn't know how to break free. Claire, as she sifted through the layers of deceit, found herself uncovering not just a case of infidelity but a twisted web of manipulation and rage. The deeper she dug, the more she understood the dark forces driving Ethan's actions. The way he had so easily swept Emily off her feet, the way he manipulated her fears and desires, it was clear now that Ethan had been playing a dangerous game all along. The question that now hung in the air was this: was Emily complicit in James's death? Or had she, too, become a victim of Ethan's twisted desire for control? The investigation into James Walker's death had reached a turning point, but Detective Claire Richardson felt like she was still missing the key piece to unlock the mystery. There was no denying that Ethan Stone and Emily Walker were at the center of it all, but the question remained: how deep did their involvement really go? Claire had been sifting through witness statements, searching for anything that might connect the two to James's brutal murder. Every detail, every piece of evidence, seemed to lead to more dead ends. It was clear that Emily's emotional connection to Ethan had clouded her judgment, but could she really be the mastermind behind James's death? And what about Ethan? He was a man with a violent past, a man who had already shown his capacity for rage. Could he have planned this from the start? As Claire reviewed the crime scene reports again, something caught her attention. James had fought back. Evidence at the scene, overturned furniture, broken glass, signs of a violent struggle, pointed to the fact that James hadn't gone down without a fight. Claire was convinced that James hadn't been killed in the heat of a random argument, but rather in a carefully orchestrated act of vengeance. Someone had planned this. But who? Ethan Stone had already become the prime suspect. His violent tendencies, his jealousy over James, his quick temper, they all made him an obvious contender. But there was one detail that didn't sit right with Claire: Ethan's alibi. He claimed to have been at his apartment the night of the murder, miles away from the crime scene. It seemed airtight. But Claire wasn't convinced. She decided to dig deeper. Her breakthrough came when Ethan's phone records were finally released. A few messages sent the night before the murder had piqued her interest. In one, Ethan sent a cryptic message to Emily, telling her, "It's time to end this. We can't let him control you anymore." The text, full of tension, raised Claire's suspicions even higher. What did Ethan mean by, "We can't let him control you anymore"? Could this be a reference to James's lingering influence over Emily, even after the divorce? Then came the chilling discovery that would change everything. Claire ordered a search of Ethan's apartment, hoping to find more evidence that could tie him directly to the crime. And she wasn't disappointed. Among the clutter of papers and old belongings, hidden in the back of a drawer, Claire found something that made her heart race: a blood-stained shirt. At first, it looked like any other piece of clothing, but it was the forensic analysis that sent shockwaves through the investigation. The blood on the shirt matched James's. It wasn't just any shirt, it was Ethan's shirt, one that he had worn the night before James's death. This was the breakthrough Claire had been waiting for. She immediately brought Ethan in for questioning, hoping to confront him with the damning evidence. Ethan, however, remained calm, his demeanor cool and collected. But Claire could sense something in his eyes: his confidence was slipping. When confronted with the blood-stained shirt, he became visibly agitated. He denied everything, claiming he had no idea how the blood had gotten on his clothes, but Claire wasn't buying it. The more Ethan denied his involvement, the more evidence piled up against him. Claire also found a series of text messages exchanged between him and Emily, detailing plans to confront James about his continued interference in their lives. The messages became more aggressive as the night went on, and one particularly chilling message stood out: "If he doesn't get the message, we'll make sure he does." The truth was becoming clearer with every passing hour, but Emily's role in the murder was still uncertain. Was she a victim, manipulated by Ethan, or was she a willing accomplice? Claire wasn't ready to jump to conclusions. She needed more. She needed Emily to break. As Claire continued to search for more clues, the pressure on Emily increased. The inconsistencies in her statements were becoming harder to ignore. First, she had claimed not to have seen James for days, but witnesses had placed her at his house the day before the murder. Emily was now in the hot seat. When Claire confronted Emily with the new evidence, the texts, the contradictions, the blood on Ethan's clothes, she could see the fear in Emily's eyes. Emily's walls finally began to crumble. In a tearful confession, Emily admitted that she had been with Ethan the night of the murder, but she insisted she had not participated in the killing. She claimed that Ethan had acted alone, but Claire wasn't convinced. Emily's guilt was evident, though. She admitted to her role in the affair and the manipulation by Ethan, but when it came to the actual murder, she swore she was just a passive bystander. However, the evidence didn't support that claim. Claire wasn't ready to let her off the hook just yet. There was something Emily wasn't saying. Ethan, on the other hand, continued to deny his involvement, but with each new piece of evidence, it was becoming increasingly impossible for him to maintain his innocence. The forensic analysis of the blood on his shirt, the text messages, the witnesses, everything pointed to Ethan Stone as the person who had orchestrated James's death. But who had truly pulled the trigger? Was Emily involved, or had she been just as trapped by Ethan as she claimed? With the investigation intensifying, Claire was determined to uncover the whole truth. She knew that the answers were out there, hidden somewhere in the twisted relationships and lies that had led to the tragic death of James Walker. Detective Claire Richardson had spent weeks trying to untangle the web of lies and betrayal surrounding James Walker's death. With every new piece of evidence, the case became more complex, and the relationships at the heart of it all grew even murkier. The deeper Claire dug into the past of Emily Walker and Ethan Stone, the more she realized how much was hidden beneath the surface. Everyone seemed to have secrets, and the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. The relationship between Emily and Ethan was more complicated than Claire had initially thought. While Emily had always appeared as a victim of Ethan's manipulation, the truth was slowly emerging: Emily was not the innocent bystander she had portrayed herself to be. Claire had discovered a hidden aspect of Emily's past, a past where she had been involved in more than just an affair with Ethan. It seemed that Emily had known about Ethan's violent tendencies long before James's death. But there was more, much more. As Claire dug through Emily's phone records and social media, she found a series of cryptic messages between the two. Ethan had warned Emily in the past about what would happen if she didn't follow through with his plans, especially when it came to James. One text stood out: "We can't keep letting him have this hold over you. If we don't deal with him now, it'll be too late." These messages were a disturbing glimpse into the mind of Ethan, but they also revealed Emily's involvement in a way she had never admitted. Claire knew that Emily wasn't just an innocent victim swept up in a dangerous affair. Emily had been complicit, at least to some extent. The question was, how far had she gone in enabling Ethan's dangerous behavior? As Claire pieced together more evidence, she learned of a secret meeting that took place between Ethan and Emily the night before James's murder. Neighbors recalled seeing Ethan's car parked near James's house around midnight. Emily had been there too, not just to say goodbye, but to discuss their plans, the very plans that led to James's death. Emily had told Claire she hadn't seen James in days, but that was a lie. With this new revelation, Claire's suspicions deepened. Ethan had become the primary suspect, but Emily's involvement was undeniable. Claire brought Emily in for questioning once more, hoping she would crack under the pressure of the growing evidence. This time, Emily seemed different. There was no more defensiveness, no more crying. Instead, she was eerily calm, as though she had already resigned herself to the truth. Claire knew this wasn't the same Emily who had once seemed so lost and confused. Now, it was clear, Emily was hiding something. As Claire pressed harder, Emily began to break down. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, but so was the guilt. Finally, Emily admitted she had been there the night James was killed. However, she claimed she didn't actually witness the murder. She insisted Ethan had acted alone, that she had been too afraid to stop him. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit, but Claire wasn't convinced. Emily's admission raised new questions. If Emily wasn't actively involved in the killing, why had she allowed Ethan to carry out his violent plan? What had driven her to let it happen? Claire needed to understand Emily's mindset. She began to ask Emily about her relationship with James and how things had fallen apart. Emily revealed that their marriage had been strained for years, but the real turning point came when they couldn't have children. She spoke of how James's devotion to her began to feel suffocating, how his constant need for validation pushed her further away. And when Ethan entered the picture, Emily felt a rush of excitement and escape. Ethan made her feel alive again. But that wasn't all. She also saw him as her ticket to a new life, free from the emotional baggage of her past. But as Emily spoke, Claire's mind raced. Was this truly about love and escape, or was there something darker at play? Emily's desire to break free from James and the life they had built together made her an easy target for Ethan's manipulation. But Claire knew there was more to Emily's role in this story than just emotional turmoil. Emily's longing for control, both in her marriage and her relationship with Ethan, had pushed her to the point of enabling murder. The more Claire listened, the more she realized that Emily's choices had been made from a place of desperation, but also a place of selfishness. She had allowed herself to be manipulated by Ethan, believing that he could offer her the life she desired. But that belief had come at a devastating cost, the life of the man who had loved her unconditionally. As the weight of the investigation pressed down on Emily, Claire made a final decision. It was time to confront Ethan directly. With the new evidence linking him to the murder, Claire knew she couldn't waste any more time. Ethan's manipulation of Emily was coming to an end. But would he admit to everything? Would he take the fall for what he had done? The investigation into the death of James Walker had reached a critical point. Detective Claire Richardson had followed every lead, pieced together every clue, but one thing had become painfully clear: the truth was more complicated than she had imagined. As the days passed, the pressure to uncover the full extent of Ethan Stone and Emily Walker's involvement only grew stronger. Despite Emily's confession that she had been present the night of the murder, there was still something missing. She claimed that Ethan had acted alone, that she had been too afraid to stop him. But was that the whole story? Claire wasn't so sure. Emily's role in the murder was still unclear. Was she a passive observer, manipulated by Ethan's control, or had she been a willing participant in James's tragic end? Every instinct told Claire that the truth was more than just Ethan's violent tendencies. She began to question Emily's true motivation. How deep was her involvement, and why had she allowed this to happen? Just when Claire thought she had reached the limit of her investigation, a crucial piece of evidence emerged. A new witness came forward. A former colleague of Ethan, named Jason Carter, who had worked with him during his time in prison, revealed something that shook Claire to her core. Jason had known Ethan well enough to recognize the dangerous nature beneath his calm exterior. In a private conversation, he admitted that Ethan had often spoken about taking care of anyone who stood in his way, anyone who interfered with his plans. Jason had always thought Ethan was exaggerating, but after hearing about James's murder, he realized the terrifying truth. But the real bombshell came when Jason dropped another bomb. Ethan had spoken about getting rid of James months before the murder. It was clear now that Ethan had been plotting the murder well before the night it happened. Claire felt the weight of the discovery. This wasn't just a crime of passion, it was something far more sinister. Ethan Stone had carefully planned and orchestrated James Walker's death, and Emily, whether she had been manipulated or not, had played a pivotal role in allowing it to happen. But the question remained, why? What had driven Ethan to take such drastic measures? Claire needed to confront Ethan one last time. He had been steadfast in his denials, his calm demeanor never cracking under pressure. But this time, Claire was prepared. She knew Ethan's guilt was undeniable, and she had all the evidence she needed to bring him to justice. The moment of confrontation came when Claire brought Ethan into the interrogation room. The air was thick with tension, and the silence between them felt suffocating. Claire placed the evidence on the table, the blood-stained shirt, the text messages, and now, the testimony from Jason. Ethan's eyes flickered when he saw the new witness's statement, his body tensing as he realized the walls were closing in. "You can't prove anything," Ethan sneered, his voice steady, but Claire could see the cracks forming. "I can prove everything, Ethan," Claire responded calmly, her gaze never wavering. "And it's all here. The texts, the blood, the witnesses. The truth always comes out." Ethan's facade finally cracked. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface came boiling out. He slammed his fist on the table, his eyes wild with fury. "Do you think I wanted this?" Ethan shouted, his voice shaking with emotion. "You think I planned this from the beginning? I didn't want to kill him. Emily, she couldn't leave him. She couldn't break free from him. I had to do it, for us." Claire was taken aback for a moment. Ethan wasn't just confessing, he was justifying his actions. The truth was even darker than she had imagined. Ethan had not killed James out of jealousy alone, he had killed him out of a twisted sense of control. Ethan believed that if Emily remained tied to James in any way, he would lose her forever. So he decided that murder was the only solution. The shock of hearing Ethan's confession was almost overwhelming, but Claire quickly refocused. She now had everything she needed. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and Ethan Stone was going to face the consequences of his actions. But then came the twist, the one that no one expected. As Ethan was about to be taken into custody, Emily came rushing into the room, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She had been watching the interrogation from behind the one-way glass, and now, she couldn't hold it in anymore. "Ethan didn't do it alone," Emily cried, her voice trembling with guilt and fear. I helped him. I knew what he was planning. I didn't stop him. I didn't try hard enough to stop him." The confession shook Claire to her core. Emily had known about Ethan's plan all along. She had let it happen. But why? Was it love, or had it been the desperate need for control, for freedom from a past that kept her bound to James? The truth was too complicated to be explained in simple terms, but it was clear now, Emily was just as responsible as Ethan for James's death. As the investigation concluded, it was clear that Ethan and Emily would both be charged for James's murder. The shockwaves of the tragedy rippled through Willow Creek, leaving the community to grapple with the devastating reality that betrayal, manipulation, and jealousy had led to a life being taken too soon. The investigation into James Walker's death had taken an unexpected turn. Detective Claire Richardson had uncovered the dark layers of deceit, manipulation, and rage between Emily Walker and Ethan Stone, but one question still lingered: why had they done it? What had driven Emily to allow her ex-husband to be murdered, even if she wasn't the one to physically commit the crime? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly fitting together, but there was still one missing link: the financial motive. It was late in the evening when Claire received a call that would change everything. A bank record had surfaced, showing something Claire hadn't anticipated: Emily had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on James, just months before his death. The policy, worth nearly $500,000, named Emily as the sole beneficiary. The timing of the policy was too coincidental to ignore. James was dead, and Emily stood to gain a small fortune. The discovery sent a chill down Claire's spine. It wasn't just about love or revenge anymore, it was about money. The murder of James Walker was no longer just a crime of passion or jealousy, it was a carefully calculated move driven by greed. Emily, in her desperation to escape the life she had once known, had made the ultimate choice, the choice to end it all, and take the money that would finally set her free. Claire couldn't believe it. She had always suspected that something wasn't right, but this was the final, undeniable proof that Emily had been more than just a passive bystander. She had been an active participant, not just in the affair with Ethan, but in a cold-blooded plan to gain financially from James's death. With this new evidence, Claire immediately arranged for another round of questioning. She knew this time, Emily couldn't hide the truth any longer. Emily, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, sat across from Claire in the interrogation room. The weight of her guilt was visible in her slumped shoulders, her eyes clouded with the reality of what she had done. As Claire laid the life insurance policy in front of Emily, the room fell silent. The truth was finally coming to light. "Emily, why didn't you tell me about this policy?" Claire asked, her voice calm but firm. "What did you really stand to gain from James's death?" Emily's face twisted in discomfort as she avoided Claire's gaze. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence only broken by the sound of Emily's shaky breath. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Emily said, her words slow, as if she were searching for a way to explain the unexplainable. "I was desperate, Claire. I wanted out. I couldn't live in that house anymore. James wasn't the man I married. He was broken. And I was too. I needed something more." The words hung in the air, but Claire wasn't buying it. This wasn't just a cry for help or an attempt to escape an unhappy marriage. This was cold calculation. Emily had used her connection with Ethan and her desperation to manipulate the situation into something far more dangerous. "Ethan told you to do this, didn't he?" Claire pressed. "You saw the money as your way out. You saw the life insurance policy as your ticket to a new life, didn't you?" Emily's eyes welled up with tears, and for a moment, Claire thought she might finally break down. But Emily remained composed, her voice now thick with regret. "I didn't want James dead. But Ethan, he said we could start over. He said we'd have a fresh start, together. He pushed me into this, Claire. He made me feel like I had no choice. And I was so angry, so frustrated with James that I let it happen. I let him do it." The words hit Claire like a punch to the gut. Emily had been complicit, but now she was trying to shift the blame. She had been manipulated by Ethan, yes, but she hadn't been the helpless victim she had portrayed herself as. Emily had known exactly what she was doing when she allowed Ethan to carry out the plan. She had seen the money, seen the chance to escape her life with James, and she had taken it. But what Claire couldn't understand was how Emily could live with herself after what had happened. How could she reconcile the woman she had once been with the cold-hearted choices she had made? The tears that finally began to spill from Emily's eyes were not for James, not for the man she had betrayed, but for the life she had lost in the process. Her own guilt was now becoming her prison, and she couldn't escape the truth that she had played a significant role in his murder. As the confession unfolded, Claire felt a mixture of anger and sorrow. The facts were clear: Ethan Stone had been the one to pull the trigger, but Emily Walker had been the one to push him toward it. She had played an active role, not just emotionally, but financially, in orchestrating James's death. With Emily's confession in hand, Claire now had the evidence she needed to move forward. The murder investigation was nearly complete, but the emotional toll on everyone involved was far from over. Willow Creek would never be the same again, and neither would Emily. Emily's confession had torn open the truth, but it had also revealed the darkness of the human heart, the depths of desperation, greed, and manipulation that could drive a person to murder. The small town of Willow Creek would never be the same again. James Walker's tragic death had shaken its foundation, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives, broken relationships, and the haunting aftermath of betrayal. But as the investigation reached its final stages, the emotional weight of what had happened became even more unbearable. Ethan Stone and Emily Walker would soon face the full force of justice, but the toll of their actions, on themselves, on the people around them, and on the entire community, was something that couldn't be easily undone. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Ethan had been found guilty of first-degree murder, the act of a man driven by jealousy and a thirst for control. The death of James Walker had been premeditated, carefully planned, and executed with cold precision. But it wasn't just Ethan who would pay the price. Emily Walker, who had allowed this tragedy to unfold, had been sentenced to 20 years in prison. Her role, though not as direct, had been undeniable. She had pushed Ethan toward his darkest actions, driven by her desire to escape a life that had become suffocating, and by her own misguided belief that the life insurance policy would offer her a way out. As the judge called for the sentencing, Ethan's face remained cold and emotionless. He had always been good at hiding his feelings, but in that moment, something inside him cracked. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now betrayed him, showing the deep regret and shame he had been trying so hard to suppress. Emily, on the other hand, broke down completely. Her sobs echoed through the courtroom as she was led away in handcuffs. She had never expected this, never imagined that the price for her choices would be so high. Both Ethan and Emily had been consumed by their emotions, their greed, and their desperation. What started as a complicated love triangle between them and James had turned into a tragedy that could never be undone. Claire Richardson, the lead detective on the case, stood in the courtroom, watching the aftermath unfold. She had brought justice to James Walker, but it didn't feel like a victory. In a way, justice could never bring him back. It could never heal the wounds left on the community, nor could it ease the torment that Emily and Ethan would now have to live with for the rest of their lives. The emotional weight of the entire case had taken its toll on Claire. Throughout the investigation, she had kept her emotions in check, focusing only on the facts. But now, as the sentencing ended, she couldn't help but feel the crushing sadness that came with the realization that 2 lives had been destroyed for nothing. For what? For money? For a moment of escape? For love that had turned to poison? As the courtroom emptied and the town slowly returned to its routine, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that Willow Creek had changed forever. The whispers in the streets, the nervous glances from neighbors who once trusted each other, and the questions left unanswered, all of it hung over the town like a cloud. Could they ever truly heal from what had happened? Could they ever forget the story of betrayal, manipulation, and murder that had rocked their peaceful lives? The questions lingered. Was the pursuit of freedom worth the cost of a life? Could Emily have escaped without destroying everything she once loved? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, how far would any of us go if we felt trapped by the life we had built? In the end, James Walker's death had not only revealed the depths of human desperation and greed, but it had also shown the destructive power of the secrets we keep and the choices we make when we believe there is no way out. So, what do you think? Was Emily a victim of Ethan's manipulation, or did she knowingly enable his actions? Can we truly ever escape the consequences of our decisions? This story raises so many questions about loyalty, greed, and the cost of betrayal. What would you have done if you were in Emily's shoes? Would you have acted differently, or would you have been caught in the same trap? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. How does this story make you feel? What lessons can we learn from Emily and Ethan's choices? We'd love to hear from you. Feel free to share your thoughts and reflect on the story, because the choices we make can shape not only our lives but the lives of everyone around us.